السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. It's always a pleasure to be here with you all at MSA West. For those of you who may not know, I actually began much of my own activism and path of learning through MSA West way back in the year 2001. I was blessed to be involved with the organization through all my years in undergrad, even into graduate school, helping out in an advisory role. So it's a very blessed organization to me, near and dear to my heart. Today our talk is about seeking knowledge. And before I get into the details of my talk, I just want us to appreciate and understand the world that we're living in right now. This is a time that you're living, but you don't realize it because of the decades that have preceded you, in terms of how absolutely insane the discourse is in the world around us, the types of ideas, the types of ignorance that are being spread through all kinds of institutions, all kinds of media, and that have become part of actually our popular culture and just kind of the air that you breathe every single day. We're dealing with a massive rise, right, in all these different ideologies, right, whether it be feminism or capitalism or liberalism or secularism, right, all these different ways of thinking about the world. And when I say all of these, it's not to disparage all of them, but to just recognize that none of these possess hidayah in them ultimately. None of these are paths to enlightenment or paths to the ultimate truth, nor are they paths to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though there might be elements from them that people find to be desirable. At the end of the day, they will lead to a place that is not optimal for the human experience. Just to give an obvious understanding of this, that even 20 years ago, things were much more. People used to think about knowledge as there were things that were true and that were false, that there was right and there was wrong. There was a sense of moral objectivity to the world. There was a sense that there's objective facts that are real. And over the last few decades, as you probably hear in your own classrooms and other spaces, we have moved into a world that really thinks in this postmodern world of everything is subjective, everything is relative. You have your truth, I have my truth, right? You have your facts, I have my alternative facts, right? And it's just complete chaos in terms of what represents anything true in this universe, which is, again, the most fundamental thing you might think about, that this is a man, right, is no longer like a fact of life. No, well, does he feel like a man and blah, blah, blah. You guys know this better than I do. And it reminds me of the verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually talks about the layers of darkness upon darkness that people might find themselves in, where he says in the Quran, أَوْ كَظُلُمَاتٍ فِي بَحْرِ لُجِّيٍّ يَغْشَاهُ مَوْجٌ مِنْ فَوْقِهِ مَوْجٌ. He talks about the disbelievers, right, and the ideas of disbelief. They are like darknesses. They are like darknesses in the depths of the ocean that have been covered by waves upon wave, and above that there are clouds. And that if someone if someone put out their hands to even see it, لَمْ يَكَدَ يَرَاهَا, you couldn't even see your hand. If anyone has gone deep sea diving, right, when you go deep into the ocean, right, you can't see anything. It's really, really, really dark. And so Allah says, ظُلُمَاتٌ, darknesses, one on top of another. And that whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not provide light to, then that person has no light. And so we are living in this time, my dear brothers and sisters, that there is darkness everywhere. You think that people, it's bright. Right? You think that there's information accessible. We have the internet, right? We have ChatGPT now to solve all of our problems. We have all these tools that should give us information at our fingertips. Yet we are probably as far away from guidance as we've been in hundreds, if not thousands of years. The world is heading in a direction of being more and more disconnected from Allah in all societies, right? In the Muslim world, generally, as well, of course, in Europe and even in America, we're seeing a decline. In the 70s, only a few percent, about 5% of Americans did not affiliate with a religion. Now we see that number is over 25%. We do the same thing with the Muslim youth, slowly, kind of more and more confusions and doubts. And it reminds me of the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the need for nur, that we are in need of light in today's day and age to see the world for what it truly is. And sometimes people think that this, well, what do you want? We have all these tools, we have all this information, right? Like, what more could we need? And the problem is not that, the problem is with the hearts. And that's what Allah is saying in the Quran. He says, فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَعْمَلْ أَبْصَارِ. It's not the eyes that are blind, but it isn't, وَلَكِنْ what? It is the blindness of the hearts. فِي الصُّدُورِ. And this is why you will hear people who have PhDs. You'll hear people who have studied for years, all kinds of different things, who will be spouting nonsense that has nothing to do with reality. And for how do young people navigate this world? Because you're here soaking up knowledge right now. That's your stage of life, is to take knowledge, and ultimately, inshallah, you'll be the ones who give knowledge. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, O you who believe, Aminu billahi wa rasulihi, believe in Allah and His Messenger. يُؤْتِكُمْ كِفْلَيْهِ مِنْ رَحْمَتِهِ كِفْلَيْنِ مِنْ رَحْمَتِهِ وَجَعَلْ لَكُمْ نُورًا تَمْشُونَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ. That if you believe in Allah and His Messenger, آمِنُوا بِرَسُولِهِ, believe in His Messenger, He will give you from His mercy and He will show you a light that will allow you to walk through this world. And my dear brothers and sisters, as I get older now, and I've been through the college experience and the postgraduate experience, it's humbling when you go back and you say so many of the things that I learned that I thought were absolute realities of this life were absolute lies. And that I actually have taken a long time to undo, right, many of those darknesses and falsehoods that were placed upon me that appeared to be so profound. At that moment when they're being said by somebody because they're more intellectual than you, because they have a better vocabulary than you, because they have more degrees than you think that what they're saying is the truth. But you start to realize that there is no light outside the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the light of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I say that as someone who's gone through graduate school, at all levels, in the sciences and the social sciences, that only once you have understanding of this deen, only when you really understand what Islam says about a topic, then can you even look at the secular material and you can bring it to life. And that's why Islam is not anti-science at all, right? It's not about not pursuing science, but the difference between the Muslim scientist and the non-Muslim scientist, if the Muslim scientist sees the beauty behind these things. He sees the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala behind how He's put together this world. Whereas a non-Muslim scientist, he only sees the atoms and the molecules at a very superficial level. So in order to have that light, you have to have an understanding of this deen. So this talk really I want us to ground in is about trying to find that light in your life. And there's a whole verse in the Quran, it's called Ayat an-Nur, right? We won't go into the depths about this verse, where Allah says, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. And the parable is given, right? It's a parable that is given about a lamp, right? And within that lamp is a burning fire, right? That is being lit by, from a tree whose oil came from this perfect olive tree, that, when it's light upon light, Allah guides to His light whoever He wills. This parable is a parable about our hearts, my dear brothers and sisters. This is the parable that's talking about how the heart of a believer is. And that within our darkness of our chest, right, we have this protective cage that protects our heart. And this heart is supposed to be like that glass that is pure and it is clean and allows revelation to come into it. That's the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this clear light, from it emanates the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And what this verse is telling us that there's two types of light. There's a light of the fitrah, that every person who's here, every human being has this intrinsic idea of what is right and wrong in this world. They have an intrinsic idea of what's moral and immoral. You don't need to be taught certain things. But it is not complete. Your knowledge is not complete with the fitrah. You need that light of revelation. You need wahi. And once wahi hits the heart, then it's nurun ala nur, right? It combusts, right? And it explodes in a way, right, that creates that understanding of this universe. And I'll tell you, my dear brothers and sisters, what Imam Malik said, a really beautiful statement, because I think sometimes, especially those who are serious about knowledge, think that it's simply taking classes and memorizing facts and all kinds of details. And Imam Malik says a beautiful statement. He said, knowledge is not in knowing a lot of narrations. He says, rather, knowledge is a light that Allah cast within the hearts. And what he means by this is that don't get caught up sometimes in the minutiae of things. Sometimes people, when they think about the study of Islam, they think about, Shaykh, what about this narrator of this hadith, and what about this, and what about that? And it's fine to be serious about knowledge, but to recognize that there's a bigger picture out there, where there's a bigger objective in the seeking of knowledge, and that is really to understand who we are in this world, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how do we pass through this world? How do we seek knowledge in this world? How do we interact with people in this world? How do we build relationships in this world? How do we leave this world in a better place than we've been here? And this comes ultimately not from books. It doesn't come from YouTube, right? It doesn't come from reading tweets. It doesn't come from following anyone on Instagram. It follows from transmission from one heart to another. And this is, again, something that I learned later in life. In the beginning, especially when you guys are in college, it's all about content, right? You guys are sitting there getting, half of your classes are online at times, right? You're reading it out of textbooks, right? You're getting it from all kinds of other sources. But ultimately, and the proof of this is that how many of you take a class and you've done all the readings, you memorize all the facts, and then if I was to test you a week after finals week, you would probably fail the exam. How many of you are like that? Right? That's all of us, right? Which tells us that that type of study, that type of pursuit of ilm is actually one that it does not lead to any true understanding of this world. I mean, think about it. You literally took an exam, and you can get an A, and then 7 days later I test you and you will get an F, right? Because you crammed it and it wasn't about anything deep and profound. And this is not how we want to approach the study of Islam. Because this is something which you need to carry you through life, right? You don't need the degree to show somebody, hey, I got a degree, so get me a job, right? This is something which is going to carry you through every single thing you do in this life. From how you work, to how you play, through your relationships with life, everything else. And thus, it comes from people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He could have revealed the Quran on a mountain, and we could have gone and grabbed the book from a mountain, and we could have studied it. But He chose to reveal it to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who He Himself learned from Jibreel in many ways, who then He taught it to His companions. And the companions taught it to their companions, and their companions taught it to their companions. And this human heart-to-heart transmission is how true knowledge is delivered. Because again, it is not an intellectual knowledge, it's also a heart knowledge, my dear brothers and sisters. It's a heart knowledge. And this is why when you see some of the quotes of some of the scholars, like Imam Abu Hanifa, he would say that I prefer to hear the stories of scholars and their lives more than focusing on the details of law, because in it there are morals and there are values. At the end of the day, Islam is a value system. It is a value system. It tells us how to govern our lifestyle. It tells us what's desirable, what's not desirable. It gives you principles as to how to live. So even if you don't know all the minutiae, you could still operate, right? You know within, you have this framework in your mind that says, I know how to be an appropriate, a dignified human in this world, even if I don't have a sheikh on speed dial to get the information from him. And I'm going to begin with this idea about when we say knowledge, what type of knowledge are we speaking about? Ultimately, there are, of course, different sciences, but I want us to begin with the idea is that when we seek knowledge, we seek it from people. And when I say this, I want to be very clear. I do not mean internet personalities. I really mean that clear. And I work at Yaqeen Institute. I'm well aware that I work in an organization that promotes content through an online medium. And I'm not to say there's not a place for that. This is kind of I say step one in the process of seeking knowledge is motivational knowledge. So if one, and this is what MSA West is about, right? This conference here is to be inspirational and motivational. So hopefully people go back with this energy to say, now what do I do? Right? Because the speakers are not going to be here beyond this weekend. You're going to go back to your home communities, your home campus. Now what? Did you feel good for 3 days and your life goes on? Like, we hope that's not the point, right? But the goal really is for you to be like, look, I want to be inspired. And to be inspired, there's so many people who can inspire you. You probably all have your favorite personalities who are out there. They're global personalities. They have large followings on social media, right? Whether it be Twitter, right, Facebook, any of these mediums, the point is they're there to inspire. But we're not only living in this world to be inspired for moments in time, right? I kind of give the example, these are like defibrillators, right? Someone's iman is weak. Someone needs to kind of shock your iman a bit so you kind of take life seriously. But then what? Now what do I do? How do I pursue something deeper, right? It has to be at the second level, which is pursuing a human relationship. So if you forgot everything I said in this whole talk and this whole weekend, and you leave with one thing, I hope it is, I have to find a person in my life to attach myself to. And not in a sense of being subservient to them, right? Or they're your absolute authority. That's not what I mean. I mean, but you're connecting to a human being, right? A brother, right, with a brother, right? Or a sister with a sister, whatever it might be. But that person becomes your mentor or your murabbi, right? That's stage 2, having a murabbi in your life. And especially in the college years, I cannot think of a more important figure to have. It's more important than any college professor you have. Likely more important than your parents at this stage of your life, because many of you have moved a little bit away from your parents, if not physically, but at least socially, right? Now you rely more on the outside world, right, for your relationships. So thinking really hard, is there a person who I can find in my community, right, who's not a celebrity, who's not a superstar, who may not be the most eloquent speaker in the world, but he or she is a person who can learn about who I am and give me what I need. The dilemma, my brothers and sisters, I work right in AI and machine learning, and we think a lot about how algorithms work. When you're on social media, when you're on the internet, the entire purpose of the engineers in the back end is to give you what you want, which is why when you Google something or you search for something, the goal is to feed you content that's going to make you watch more content. So it's to feed your nafs. You want to look into videos about jinn possession, you'll find a million videos, one after another they'll come to you, right? Because you've asked for it. Which is very different than what a murabbi does or what a prophet does. A prophet or a murabbi or any mentor in this case, their job is not to give you what you want, their job is to give you what you need. And sometimes it's not always what you want. And that's why if you don't have a teacher, your nafs, you end up becoming a slave to your own nafs. You go through this process of self-study, finding the type of personalities that you like, finding the personalities who say what you want to say, and there's a lot of confirmation bias, right? And of course, many of you who live in the world of social media know this better than I do, but they become black holes, right? There are people whose content they generate, right? And this is the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Be wary of this. He said, "Ma dhi'ban ja'i'an ursila fi ghanamin bi afsada laha min hirs al-mar'i 'ala al-mali wa sharafi li dinihi." He said, there's two ravenous wolves in every person's heart that will do more damage to your heart and your faith than a flock of sheep if it was left in a pen of, a wolf left in like an open pen of sheep. Think about it. If you just left your pen open and you have sheep, I know you're not farmers, but try to think about it for a minute, right? How badly was that wolf destroy the sheep that are there? You'd say, of course, it'll destroy that. The Prophet is saying in your heart, you have two wolves that are far more destructive. He says, love of wealth and love of power. And let's be honest, my dear brothers and sisters, what else is the world of social media other than the pursuit of likes and power and influence or monetization, right, through all kinds of other means? And let's be very honest, I know this is being recorded, right? It's okay, but I like to be very blunt with people. Don't think that in the Islamic space that this stuff is not existent, right? It exists as much in the Islamic space because there's a market for everything, right? And as the prompt, that Habib had provided me, right? We're living in a world where like anyone, literally, you can go into your home today, you can go buy a thobe online, right? Or go buy an abaya online, right? And you can wear it, and in your backdrop, you can put a picture of like the Kaaba or Aqsa, right? And you can literally say what you want and appear to be like a religious person who's espousing knowledge, right? But in reality, that person is misguided and misguiding others, right? And so much of what's out there is detrimental to your heart, incredibly detrimental to your heart. And I'm warning you all about it because we see person after person after many, many years pass or months pass realize how deep they've gone into the darkness. And they say, where have you been? So I've been sitting on YouTube listening to this person for months and months and months, and now I have a certain perspective of the world, right? And so what I'm calling to is something very different. I'm really, really advising you all to find a person in your life, in the proximity that you can physically meet them if possible, that you can go to regularly and inculcate a relationship. And this is the history of our ummah, the history of our ummah. I remember doing it in Egypt for years myself. I remember doing it here in Southern California. I remember even doing it where I would drive from Southern California to Northern California to spend the weekend, right, with the scholars who live in this community. Some who are speaking at this conference 20 years ago, we would come spend time with them. But it really was through that heart connection. And this is why I'll just give you some of the statements, right, that we think about these famous scholars and we think about them being oceans of knowledge. But ultimately, they were actually fundamentally understood as people of akhlaq and character first and foremost. That is the number one kind of like proof, right, that somebody is even worthy of spending a minute with. If somebody doesn't have the character that reminds you of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ or reminds you of the attributes of Allah, then that person should not be pursued. And this is why Imam Malik, as an example, his mother would say to him, go and study. When he was a young boy, imagine she would dress up her young son like a scholar and say, go and study with this man. His name was Rabi'a, right? Go and study with Rabi'a and learn from his manners before you learn from his knowledge. Right? Another person, he narrated that Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, right, the great scholar with his own madhab, said that 5,000 people used to attend his halaqas that he would teach. They said 500 people would take notes. And they said the rest of them would learn from his good character. Right? Another person said, I would sit in his halaqah for 12 years where he taught his hadith book. 12 years. And I didn't take notes, and I just learned from his character for 12 years. Right? And so this is kind of how the scholars understood that this is the first, or the ultimate manifestation of knowledge. So if you want to have a litmus test to say, should I study with this person or not? First of all, if it's online world, you don't know their character. And sadly, as too many facts come out over time, so many of the personalities that seem larger than life, what they say on the screen doesn't match their personal lives. And so this is why it's so important that it's somebody who you trust, somebody who you see. I see how they treat the janitor in the building. I see how they treat the person who cleans the masjid toilets. I see that person, how they treat their wife or their kids, right? Or a person who's above them or below them. And if you don't see that as a shining example, then please, please, please distance yourself, right, from such a person. I want to give time for Q&A, but I'll because I know we have, how much time do we have, by the way? Where's my timekeeper? Talk to us, I think it's 5 minutes, so it's fine. Well, timekeeper, let me know so I don't keep going. But there's a few key things I want to bring up, which is number one, for those who are serious about pursuing knowledge, that there also is a form of deception that can occur. And Ibn Jawzi, he writes about this quite a bit in his writings, a great scholar. He talks about there is ghurur in everything that one could do. And that even applies in the pursuit of knowledge. So sometimes there are Muslims who are like, hey, yeah, I want to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to get closer to my life of being a good Muslim. And so they're motivated to study Islam. But then on the pursuit, sometimes things change. Motivations can change, right? Niyas can get changed. And I want to remind us all of a Prophet ﷺ, his hadith that I really think speaks to the world we live in today. And just kind of have this branded in your memory. He said that whoever seeks knowledge to impress the scholars, or to argue with the foolish, or to attract the attention of people, Allah will admit that person into the hellfire. Right? It's a really powerful hadith to ground all of us, right? There's one purpose to this knowledge. It is to gain love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the nearness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and ultimately to get Jannatul Firdaus. That's the goal of it, right? And if no one else knew of your knowledge, it shouldn't make a difference. And by the way, there are people like this who exist. There are people in the world who have such tremendous knowledge. Sometimes they're in your communities. If you sat down with them, they really should be the imam of the masjid, but they're unknown gems. They pursue it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I remember as an imam seeing this, where I'm the imam of the masjid, and you started getting to know people in the community, and you're like, this person has 10 times more knowledge than I do, yet they've never stood up to give a khatara. They've never stood up to give a speech. And that's how you know, like, it's not about doing it for the sake of others. And especially in the online world today, my dear brothers and sisters, be really careful about this. Because so much of what's out there is clickbait. So much about it is to just bring you in so they can add that like, add that view, right? And it gets advertising revenue and so many other things that are out there, right? Be really, 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 really mindful of this. Which then leads to the second type of ghurur, right? Which is obviously on the speaker side or on the scholar side, but on the side of those who are listening, right? Be mindful of your nafs and what your nafs wants to hear, right? And again, I'll be blunt, and I hope that my pulse is accurate here, right? There's a world we're becoming more and more polarized, especially when it comes to issues of gender. And so there's a sphere, right, of speakers who will speak, to men, and a sphere who will speak to women, and then the brothers, right, who are unhappy with the state of the world, right? They love those speakers who bash sisters all day long, right? And then those become like, yes, this is my sheikh, right? And it's like, this is your nafs wants this to be true, right? Your nafs is looking for something, and you're finding confirmation bias in this. Again, you have no idea who that person is. Deep down, you know that it's probably not accurate, right? But again, it's that world of like, I'm feeding myself what it is I want to see. And for the sisters, it's the exact same thing, right? I mean, I'm very open about this, right? After that Roe v. Wade, right? Some of the big personalities in the US, right, who are female would get up and say, my body, my choice, right? I mean, they're Muslim, who wear the garb and everything. You're like, this is not Islamic. So I don't care whether it's not about male or female, it's about, is this true and is this in line with our principles? But people are saying that for all kinds of reasons. They're saying it because either they've deluded themselves, right? They have false knowledge, they're trying to attract a following. Only Allah knows their true intention, but all I know is that it's not true. And so I'm not here to be, like, the truth is not, it's not true because this person said it, right? That's not, like, we don't observe the truth by the people who are saying it. It's a famous statement of Ali ibn Abi Talib, right? Like, people are known by what's true. So if they're saying what's true, then they're right. Then they're truthful people. If they're saying it's false, right? They're not. And so be really, really careful. And almost I'd recommend, like, I know this is harsh advice, and people tell me all the time I'm way too hard on this. Like, get out of this world of like internet dawah. Just get out of it. Like 99% of it, right, is not good. Some of it is very good, and that's the motivational stuff. It's the motivational stuff that's going. And the way you know that is after you hear it. Do you now feel like doing something positive? If you're like, look, I feel closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? I want to worship Allah better, right? I want to understand the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam better. I want to emulate his character more, right? I want to be like this companion. Great. If it's now you're armed with more and more critique about why the whole world is doomed, right? Then you know this is the wrong thing, right? And that's why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said this in the hadith. He said, "Man qala an-nas," he said, "Man qala an-nas qad halak, fahuwa ahlakahum." He said, whoever says that people are destroyed, then there's two narrations. One of them says then he is the most destroyed of them, or it says he is the cause of their destruction, right? Two different narrations, right? So when people, enter into the space and they're listening and they're like, look, man, let me tell you everything wrong with everyone in the ummah. This sheikh is misguided, that sheikh is misguided, this organization is misguided, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. It's like, this is exactly the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? That when someone says that everyone is misguided, then he is the most guided of all of those people, right? We have to find knowledge from people who speak well of one another, right? To find knowledge from people who respect one another's differences. And this is how, like, every major scholar in history that we deal with, how they dealt with. Even if they had massive disagreements, They did not see eye to eye. And by the way, there was massive animosity at times between scholars, intellectually, right? A beautiful example I think of is the example of Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, right? One of the great scholars, one of my favorites. The relationship he had with his student Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Probably heard these names before. These were very, very close student-teacher relationship. So close, by the way, that when Ibn Taymiyyah was sent to prison, Ibn Qayyim followed him in prison until he died. Can you imagine how much a sheikh, like a student loved a sheikh? It's like, I'll stay in prison with you, all right, until you die, right? So he said a story one time. Ibn Qayyim that he said had a major effect on him. He said that one time, one of the biggest adversaries of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he died. So he said, I was so happy. So guys, I went to the sheikh's house and I said, good news, so-and-so has passed away, right? And he was thinking his teacher would be like, great, one of the guys who badmouths me day and night has died, right? And he says that Ibn Taymiyyah got so mad at me, right? And he scolded me, right? And he grabbed me by the hand. He walked me to the house of the sheikh who passed away. He's like, he knocked the door, he consoled the family, he made dua for them, offered them all of his support and his services. And he says that he learned so much from him in that experience alone. And he said that the people of his era would say to one another, we wish we could treat our friends the way Ibn Taymiyyah treats his enemies, right? Like this is what, subhanAllah, and Ibn Taymiyyah had a sharp tongue. He had no problem speaking the truth, right? But he knew, and he would say to people when he was in jail, they'd say, hey, do you want to seek revenge? And he's like, listen, I've already forgiven these people, right? I don't care. It's not about, what they're saying, it's about the truth. I'm just here to speak, right, the truth. And this happened over and over in history, whether it be with Imam Malik, right, Imam Abu Hanifa, all these scholars who had their own, institutions, right, the love they had for one another, right? It was very close, right? And yes, it's differences of opinion, it's different methodologies. It doesn't matter, right? If one is, more inclined on the Salafi side, or the Ikhwani side, or the Tablighi side, or this group or that group, right? There is mutual love and respect because they know that these people are all trying their best to pursue a path of getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And that, by the way, is something that takes me about 20 years to learn as well. Right? So I'm trying to cut the mistakes I made, right, out of your own lives. I know sometimes you can't do that, and everyone has to learn through experience, because we always have this propensity when you're young. Young people, they're very black and white. Right? There is one answer to things. Right? And then you realize as you get more and more experience in life and you gain more and more knowledge that there's a whole lot more gray in the world that exists. That is based on Quran and Sunnah. And that's my point I want to be very clear about. There's a verse in the Quran, people are often taught to a fault that the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ are exact, right? And their meanings are clear cut, right? And there's it's so easy to figure out, everything's black and white, right? And this is why you even hear scholars or people would say, every letter in the Quran is exact and every harakah is exact. It's not exactly. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, He says a verse in Surah Al-Imran. He said, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ هُنَّ أُمُّ الْكِتَابِ وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. Allah Himself is saying in the Quran, He has revealed to you, O Muhammad, this book. And in it there are verses that are muhkamat, that are clear-cut, unambiguous. هُنَّ أُمُّ الْكِتَابِ. That makes up the bulk of the Quran. But then He says, وَآيَاتٌ What? Then He says, وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. And there are other ayat that are ambiguous, that are not clear-cut, that have some ambiguity and vagueness within them. And then Allah explains why He does this. He says, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ ابْتِغَاءَ الْفِتْنَةِ وَابْتِغَاءَ تَأْوِيلِهِ. There are people who have in their hearts a disease, and they don't like the gray. And so they're always trying to get out of the gray in there, and they will make all kinds of interpretations, and that actually leads them down a path that is that is a path of misguidance. And then He says, but those who have knowledge, what do they say? كُلُّ مِنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. It's part of the verse, it's very important. And no one knows the interpretation of some of those ayat except for Allah, which means Allah is reserving some knowledge for Himself. And some scholars have talked about the fact that in the recitation you can continue, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. And some scholars. I'll tell you, my dear brothers and sisters, there are verses that I read for 20 years and I did not understand what they meant. And 20 years later, I'm like, aha. Sometimes it takes time. There has to be there has to be intellectual humility with your pursuit of this deen. So those who have firm knowledge, what do they say? They say even the stuff that is gray, even the stuff that's ambiguous, all of it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't dispute it. But this verse is important because it establishes you have to be able to tolerate the gray. You have to be able to tolerate that things are not always as clear as you think they are. So a sheikh says a hadith, right, or somebody, and he's like, this is the truth. Everyone who doesn't accept this, they don't know what they're talking about, right? like, do you know that hadith can be interpreted like 5 different ways? Right? Do you know that some scholars say that hadith is not fully authentic or this or that? But to the layperson, it's like the sheikh spoke the truth and he said this is a hadith and the proof has been established, or this Quran is, no. Step back sometimes, be like, there's a lot of ambiguity purposely built in. Purposely built in. Number one, to make us humble, to realize it will never encompass all of the meanings that are captured in the Quran or in the Sunnah. Right? Number two, so that we keep studying. If things were so easy, if the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ were like written like for like a child, and you read it once and you understand all of it, why would you keep reading the Quran? Why would you like this? How can like math and science be so intricate and complicated and profound? Yet you'd say like, no, my religious scripture is like, at a 5-year-old's reading level. No, it's going to be deep, right? It's going to be profound. There's going to be depths in there. You can only uncover it through reading it over and over and over from different angles. And there's, again, so many reasons why that ambiguity is there, but again, it is purposeful. And so as someone begins to study Islam with people who show them this, it actually makes you more and more tolerant. As one scholar said, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he said, sometimes I would study hadith not to learn what I should do. He's like, so I would learn what the other people are doing. In other words, there's a hadith that he would act upon, but he heard there's Muslims who do different things. So he would go and study those hadith to figure out, let me have the evidence for why they do things different than why I do those things. So as I'm coming to a close, I think only a few minutes, I want to give time for Q&A because I know this could be a hot topic. The message here, my dear brothers and sisters, is that pursue a systematic study of Islam that is regular and consistent. This is why the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Allah loves those deeds that are done consistently, even if they're small. If you, every single week of your life, you're studying a little bit, you will see that in the next 10 or 20 years, where you're going to be in terms of understanding. Versus people who say, you know what, I'm going to go to the conference that's in town. We also have another movement I'll speak about, which is the let's compress and condense knowledge into weekend seminars. And you come for a weekend and I'll throw at you what I learned in the whole semester. This is not how knowledge is gained. And it's not how it's going to be in your heart. It's not going to be things you manifest, right, in your character. So I'm not saying these are bad, but they're not the methods of getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not the methods of truly internalizing, right, the message of Islam. Right? They are, again, motivational tools. Right? Use them as motivation. Do not use them for more than they're meant to be. So to pursue the systematic study with a human being, but also to read books. So it's not that books don't have knowledge. It's that but when you read these books, you read books about Islam, and you also have someone to speak to about them. So whether it be friends, people in your halaqah, right, a scholar who you have access to, but again, you're systematically and you're studying your faith. And that means you're studying not just a subject that you like, right? It's like I'm going to study seerah, right? I'm going to study tafsir, right? I'm going to study hadith. I need to be a well-rounded person, right? It can't be that I only study a topic, right, is of interest to me, and I leave the rest of them. We're being balanced, right? We're being holistic believers. I'm going to end on that note because I know there's going to be some questions, and then I'll have some closing comments, inshallah. So I know you've had your hand up, so we'll go there. We have 5 minutes total? Okay.
What was the surah about the ambiguity?
So Ali Imran, chapter number 3, I think it's verse number 7. Yeah.
How would you encourage your parents to seek knowledge?
Your parents to? Good question. I have found the best way to encourage your parents to seek knowledge is for you to pursue knowledge and for them to see the fruits of you seeking knowledge. And typically, it would lead to parents who are doing that because now they see that. Because if you pursue knowledge and it's just academic, they're not going to want to do it, right? And if you pursue knowledge, they see this person, who is my child, has now become better than I could have done, and that knowledge is elevating them. Inshallah, it'll motivate them. Now, what can you do to do that? As you get to that point and you're getting further and further, extend that hand to your parents. Ask them to join you, right, in these programs, especially if it's in the masjid, right, or in a physical location that you guys can all meet. Of course, in the online world, if something inspirational you found, of course you can share that with your parents. But on that note of sharing things, be mindful of something, which is, imagine a few hundred years ago, or 50 years ago, before technology, you would hear an inspirational quote by maybe a scholar at the masjid, and that quote might really make you think about life. Here's a dilemma, my dear brothers and sisters. For those of you who are plugged into Islam on the internet, you are getting inspirational quotes right now in your pocket. And you're numb to all of them. You're numb to all. How many times can you get an ayah or a hadith or a quote of this scholar and that scholar until you just start to almost ignore them? So actually there is information overload. Do not inundate yourself with these messages, even though they're good, wholesome messages. And that's what Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he told his companion, he said, why don't you teach us every day? He had a once-a-week class for them. He's like, no, you're going to get bored. If I teach you every single day and I lecture you, you're going to tire of listening to me. And that's what's happened to many believers. They're like, yeah, I follow Sheikh so-and-so and Sheikh so-and-so and so-and-so. Yeah, but, It's like you're scrolling and you get this advertisement and then this other terrible advertisement and then like, this profound like think about death and then you get the advertisement. It's like, really, you're thinking about the advertisements more than thinking about death, right? So just plug out of a lot of that to the best of your ability, right? Yes?
Yeah, this is something I want to add and comment to what you said. In the hadith, it also suggests there are two different kind of people. In the servant of Allah, we have Salih and we have Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
We are doing righteousness. Everyone, every single one of us, we know our capacity. We know what we are able to do. So like the brother in your community that you said you didn't even know that he has more knowledge than you, that's a solid.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sort of Allah.
Yes.
And he knows he doesn't have the energy to get, maybe he's shy to even get behind the
Yes.
to talk. But some of us, we have the energy. We can
Yes.
we are Muslim, we want to be there, just like we know, we want to share it. So we need to always remember that.
Yes, no,
And
exactly.
at every occasion is different. This occasion I'll be Muslim, and my body might have that energy of being Muslim. But another occasion might be, I just want to be solid.
Yes, no, jazakallah khair.
So every single one of us should remember that.
Yeah. So the sister made a really good point about, look, there is that balance between, of course, there's times where someone's just a righteous person, like they're not in the business of getting up and promoting it, but there's also times to use that energy in the right way. And I think that balance is supposed to be where, like, you don't put yourself on that platform and push yourself into that platform. If you carry something valuable, you will see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grab you and bring it. It's just like these people in the community. They're incredible people, and I was like, you know way too much. Get up, and I need you to talk to even a small group of people, right? You're going to get up in that whatever capacity. But the point here is that one is not doing it like, look, I want to go learn so I can get up and I can go and speak. Oh, so I can go and I can start like an Instagram account and be popular, right? And this is, by the way, what is happening. It's really, really happening. That is the niyyah and the goal. It's like, well, how do I monetize, right, my dawah in this sense, right? Or how do I become, a personality, right, in this space? And what do you end up doing, sadly? You become more and more kind of egregious in what you say because that brings more and more attention, of course, right? So I think I'm being asked that we are out of time. But again, jazakallah khair. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fill all of our hearts with nur. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove the darknesses that we are exposed to. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us all to people who guide us to Him, and that we may guide others as well to His cause. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.